Stop scrolling. Don't skip this. Because what you're about to hear might feel like a story, but for someone out there, it is reality. And maybe it is yours too. Let me ask you something honestly. When was the last time you called someone you love? Just to talk. Not because you needed something. Not because it was urgent. But just because you cared. When was the last time you truly lived a day without thinking about money, stress, or the future? If you can't remember, then listen carefully. Because this story is not about success. It is not about failure. It is about something far more dangerous. Something most people realize too late. Time. There was a man named Daniel. From the outside, his life looked perfect. A good job. A nice apartment. Money in his bank account. Respect from people. And a future that seemed guaranteed. But inside, he was slowly breaking. Every day, he told himself the same lie. Just a little more success. Then I will start living. Just a few more years. Then I will spend time with my family. Just one more promotion. Then I will slow down. But that later never came. Because life doesn't wait. And neither does time. One night, everything changed. A phone call. A hospital. And a sentence he would never forget for the rest of his life. She might not make it. In that moment, Daniel realized something terrifying. All the money he worked for, all the overtime, all the nights he sacrificed sleep, none of it could stop what was happening. Because life was never asking for his success. It was asking for his presence. And he wasn't there. Not when it mattered. Now tell me something. How many times have you said, "I'm busy right now"? How many family calls have you ignored? How many moments have you postponed, thinking there will always be tomorrow? Because Daniel thought the same thing. Until tomorrow almost disappeared from his life forever. And when he finally understood the truth, it wasn't beautiful. It was painful. Because he realized something no one wants to accept. You can replace money. You can rebuild a career. You can start again after failure. But you can never, ever, get back lost time. Not a single moment. Not a single memory. Not a single goodbye. And right now, while you're watching this, you might still believe you have time. You might still believe life will slow down later. You might still believe your loved ones will always be there. But what if you're wrong? What if one normal day becomes your turning point? What if one missed call becomes your biggest regret? What if one "I'll do it tomorrow" becomes something you can never fix? This is not just Daniel's story. This is a mirror. And what you see in it depends on what you choose after this moment. Because life is quietly moving forward, whether you are ready or not. And somewhere in this world, someone just had their last normal day without knowing it. So before this story continues, ask yourself one thing honestly. If today was your last normal day, would you still live it the same way? Or would you finally start living differently? Because if you're watching this, it means one thing for sure. You still have time. But the real question is, will you use it before it uses you? If you're watching this, you still have time. Those were the final words Daniel heard from his father. Not in person. Not face to face. But through an old voicemail he almost deleted one lonely night. At the time, those words didn't mean much to him. They sounded like one of those emotional things people say when they grow older. Something dramatic. Something temporary. But years later, Daniel would realize those words were not just advice. They were a warning. And by the time he understood them, he had already lost almost everything that truly mattered. Daniel was the kind of person people admired online. At 29 years old, he had what most people dreamed about. A high-paying corporate job. A luxury apartment in the city. Branded clothes. A new car parked beneath his building every night. His Instagram was filled with smiling photos, expensive restaurants, business trips, and motivational captions. People commented things like, "Living the dream," "Goals," "I wish I had your life." But nobody knew the truth. Daniel's life only looked beautiful from a distance. Behind closed doors, he barely slept more than 4 hours a night. His apartment was always silent. He ate most of his meals alone while staring at a laptop screen. Every morning began with stress, and every night ended with exhaustion. He kept telling himself it was temporary. Just a few more years, he would whisper. A few more promotions. A little more money. A little more success. Then he would finally relax. Then he would finally spend time with family. Then he would finally enjoy life. But deep down, Daniel already knew something dangerous was happening. His life was moving forward. But emotionally, he felt completely empty. Every time his mother called, he answered with the same sentence. "Mom, I'm busy right now. I'll call later." Later rarely came. His younger sister, Emily, stopped inviting him to family dinners because she already knew the answer. His old friends slowly disappeared from his life one by one. Not because they hated him. Because Daniel was never present anymore. Work became his entire identity. And the scariest part? Society rewarded him for it. The more exhausted he became, the more successful people considered him. One evening, after a long business meeting, Daniel returned home around midnight. Rain hit the windows of his apartment while city lights flickered outside like distant stars. He dropped his keys onto the kitchen counter and stared around the room. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked perfect. But the silence felt unbearable. No laughter. No family. No warmth. Just the sound of rain and the low buzzing of his refrigerator. Daniel opened social media to distract himself. Photos of happy people filled his screen. Vacations. Weddings. Smiling families. For a moment, he felt jealous. Not of their money. Of their connection. He threw his phone onto the couch and rubbed his tired eyes. That's when his phone suddenly rang. Emily. He almost ignored it. Almost. But something inside him told him to answer. "Hey," he said quietly. Emily's voice sounded shaky. Mom collapsed. Daniel froze instantly. The room suddenly felt colder. "What?" "She's in the hospital," Emily whispered through tears. "The doctors are checking her right now." For a few seconds, Daniel couldn't move. His heartbeat became louder than the storm outside. Without saying another word, he grabbed his jacket and rushed toward the door. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Rain blurred the windshield while his hands trembled on the steering wheel. His thoughts raced faster than the cars around him. What if he loses her too? The question kept repeating in his mind. Traffic lights felt slower. Every second felt cruel. And then, memories began attacking him. Ignored phone calls. Cancelled visits. Birthdays he missed because of work. The last family dinner he promised to attend, but never showed up to. For the first time in years, Daniel realized something terrifying. He had been acting like the people he loved would live forever. When he finally arrived at the hospital, he rushed through the emergency entrance searching desperately for Emily. He found her sitting alone outside the emergency room. Her eyes were red from crying. The moment she saw him, she stood up silently. "You came," she whispered. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Emily looked at him for a long moment before quietly saying something that shattered him inside. "You should have come earlier." Daniel lowered his head. Because he knew she wasn't talking about the hospital. She meant everything. All the missed years. All the ignored moments. All the times he chose work instead of family. Daniel sat beside her in silence while machines beeped behind the emergency room doors. Hours passed slowly. Doctors walked by. Nurses whispered. The smell of medicine filled the cold hallway. And while sitting there, Daniel noticed an elderly man watching him from across the room. The old man looked calm. Almost peaceful. After a while, he slowly walked toward Daniel and sat beside him. "You look scared," the man said softly. Daniel nodded. "I might lose my mother." The old man stayed silent for a moment before speaking again. "Most people think they have unlimited time," he said quietly. "Until life reminds them they don't." Daniel stared at the floor. The man continued. "Life whispers before it screams. But people are too distracted to listen." Those words hit Daniel harder than he expected. Because deep down, he knew life had been warning him for years. The loneliness, the emptiness, the guilt, the constant feeling that something important was missing. But he ignored every sign. He kept chasing success while slowly losing himself. A few minutes later, a doctor finally walked out of the emergency room. Daniel immediately stood up. The doctor removed his mask and said, "She's stable now." Daniel closed his eyes in relief. But while Emily cried tears of relief beside him, Daniel felt something else. Fear. Because for the first time in his life, he realized how close he was to losing everything that actually mattered. And standing in that cold hospital hallway, hearing the rain hit the windows outside, Daniel finally understood something terrifying. Sometimes life gives you another chance. And sometimes it doesn't. After the night at the hospital, Daniel tried to return to his normal routine. But nothing felt normal anymore. The office that once made him feel important now felt like a prison. The endless meetings, fake smiles, and constant pressure suddenly seemed meaningless. Before, Daniel used to walk through the building with confidence. People respected him. Co-workers admired him. His boss trusted him with major projects. But now, every compliment sounded empty. One morning, while sitting in a meeting room surrounded by charts and presentations, Daniel noticed something strange. Nobody looked happy. Everyone looked tired. People laughed at jokes they didn't find funny. They drank coffee like machines running out of energy. Conversations were no longer about dreams or family. Only numbers, deadlines, money, performance. Daniel stared at the large glass windows beside him. Outside, the world continued moving normally. Cars filled the streets. People crossed sidewalks. Life continued. But inside that room, everyone looked emotionally trapped. Including him. His manager suddenly called his name. "Daniel, are you listening?" Daniel blinked quickly. "Yeah, sorry." The manager continued talking, but Daniel couldn't focus anymore. For the first time, he asked himself a question he had avoided for years. What am I becoming? That question followed him everywhere. At home, at work, even during sleepless nights. A few days later, Daniel visited his mother again. She looked weaker than before, but she smiled the moment she saw him. "You look tired," she said gently. Daniel forced a smile. "I'm fine." But mothers always know the truth. She held his hand softly and whispered, "You don't have to destroy yourself just to prove you're successful." Daniel looked away immediately. Because deep down, he knew that was exactly what he was doing. That evening, he returned to his apartment feeling emotionally exhausted. For the first time in years, he turned off his television, placed his phone face down, and sat alone in complete silence. No music, no distractions, just his thoughts. And that's when the memories started returning. He remembered being a teenager sitting beside his father on the roof of their old house during summer nights. Back then, life felt simple. They didn't have much money, but they laughed often. His father used to tell him, "Success means nothing if you lose yourself while chasing it." At the time, Daniel didn't understand those words. Now they haunted him. Unable to sleep, Daniel began cleaning his apartment around midnight. While moving old boxes from the closet, he discovered a dusty container he hadn't opened in years. Inside were photographs, letters, and old family memories. Daniel slowly picked up the first photo. It showed him as a child sitting on his father's shoulders at a carnival. Both of them were smiling. Real smiles. Not the fake ones he posted online. Another photo showed Emily covered in birthday cake while their mother laughed in the background. Then he found pictures of road trips, family dinners, and late-night movie nights. Simple moments. But somehow they looked more valuable than everything he owned now. Daniel sat on the floor for hours staring at those memories. And suddenly, his expensive apartment felt painfully empty. He had spent years buying things he thought would make him happy. But happiness was never inside those things. It was inside moments. Moments he no longer had. Tears slowly filled his eyes as he realized something heartbreaking. He had become rich in possessions, but poor in life. The next morning, Daniel overslept for work. His boss called him 3 times. Normally, Daniel would panic. But this time, he just stared at the phone ringing on the table. For the first time, work no longer felt like the most important thing in the world. Later that night, while searching through the old box again, Daniel found his father's phone. The battery barely worked, but after charging it for a few minutes, the screen finally turned on. Dozens of old voicemail recordings appeared. Daniel hesitated before pressing play. His father's warm voice filled the room. "Hey son, just checking on you." Another message. "Don't work too hard." Then another. "Your mother made your favorite dinner today. She wishes you were here." Daniel closed his eyes tightly. Each message felt heavier than the last. Then he found the final voicemail. The date was only a few days before his father passed away. With shaking hands, Daniel pressed play. For a moment, there was only silence. Then his father's weak voice slowly spoke. "If you're listening to this, you still have time." Daniel froze. His father continued softly. "Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't spend your whole life chasing things that disappear. The people you love, that's what matters." Daniel's breathing became uneven. "You think there will always be more time," his father whispered. "But one day you wake up and realize time was the only thing you were losing all along." The voicemail ended, but Daniel remained sitting there in silence. Then suddenly, he broke down crying harder than he had in years. Not because of the voicemail itself, but because every word was true. Daniel realized he had spent most of his adult life running toward success, running toward approval, running toward a future where he believed happiness would finally begin. But while chasing tomorrow, he completely ignored today. And now, for the first time, he saw the terrifying truth clearly. Life was not waiting for him to slow down. Life was already happening. Every ignored phone call, every missed memory, every postponed moment, they were gone forever. Daniel walked to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. His face looked older, tired, emotionally empty. And standing there in silence, Daniel felt fear growing inside him. Not fear of failure, not fear of losing money. Fear of reaching the end of his life and realizing he never truly lived at all. That thought changed something deep inside him. Because, for the first time, Daniel no longer wanted to survive. He wanted to live. The morning after hearing his father's voicemail, Daniel didn't go to work. For the first time in nearly 7 years, he turned off his alarm, ignored his emails, and sat quietly beside his apartment window watching the sunrise. The city was already awake. Cars filled the streets below. People rushed toward offices carrying coffee cups and tired expressions. Everyone looked like they were chasing something invisible. Daniel used to be one of them. But now, something inside him felt different. Not healed. Not peaceful. Just awake. His phone vibrated non-stop on the table beside him. Missed calls from coworkers. Messages from clients. Notifications from social media. Normally, he would respond immediately. But this time, he simply turned the phone upside down. For the first time in years, silence felt more valuable than attention. A few hours later, Daniel walked into his office building carrying a small envelope in his hand. The receptionist smiled at him. "Big meeting today, right?" Daniel gave a weak smile. "Not anymore." He walked toward his manager's office slowly, feeling his heartbeat grow louder with every step. When he entered the room, his manager looked surprised. "You're late," he said. "We've been trying to reach you all morning." Daniel nodded quietly and placed the envelope on the desk. His manager frowned. "What's this?" "My leave request." The room became silent instantly. His manager leaned back in his chair. "You're taking vacation now? During the biggest project of the year?" "It's not a vacation," Daniel replied softly. "I just need to stop for a while." The manager stared at him like he was speaking another language. "Daniel, people would kill to have your position." That sentence once meant everything to him. Now it felt meaningless. Daniel lowered his eyes. "I know. You've worked years for this," the manager continued. You're close to becoming regional director." Daniel gave a tired smile. "And what happens after that?" The manager looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Another promotion, more stress, less sleep," Daniel asked quietly. "Then another promotion after that?" His manager stayed silent, because deep down, even he knew the answer. The system never stops asking for more. Daniel walked out of the office that day feeling strangely light. Not happy, but free. For the first time in years, his future no longer felt controlled by deadlines and expectations. A week later, Daniel drove back to his hometown, the same small town he had spent years trying to escape. As he entered the streets, memories returned instantly. The old grocery store on the corner, the basketball court where he played as a teenager, the bakery that still smelled like fresh bread every morning. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, but somehow more real. When he parked outside his childhood home, he sat inside the car for several minutes staring at the front door. He felt nervous, not because his family would reject him, because he knew how much time he had already lost. Finally, he stepped out and walked toward the house. Before he could knock, the door opened. His mother stood there silently. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around him tightly, and Daniel nearly broke apart inside, because he realized something painful. Even after all the missed calls, ignored visits, and years of distance, she still loved him exactly the same. That night, Daniel sat at the dinner table with his mother and Emily for the first time in years. The conversation was simple. Stories, memories, small jokes. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive. Yet somehow, it felt more meaningful than every luxury dinner he'd ever attended. At one point, Emily smiled and said, "It feels like we finally got you back." Daniel looked down quietly because he didn't know how to answer. The truth was, he was still trying to find himself too. Over the following weeks, Daniel slowly began rebuilding his life. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just one small step at a time. He started waking up early and taking long walks through the neighborhood without headphones or distractions. For years, he had constantly filled every silent moment with noise. Music, podcasts, social media, work calls, anything to avoid being alone with his thoughts. Now, he allowed himself to simply exist. And slowly, his mind became quieter. He began reading books again, something he hadn't done since college. He started helping his mother around the house. Sometimes he cooked dinner with Emily while laughing about old childhood memories. Those moments healed parts of him he didn't even realize were broken. One afternoon, Daniel opened his social media account and stared at his profile for a long time. Thousands of followers, hundreds of photos, smiling faces, luxury vacations, perfect captions. But suddenly, it all looked fake. Because none of those photos showed the anxiety, the loneliness, the sleepless nights, the emptiness. Daniel quietly deleted the app from his phone. And for the first time in years, he felt no need to prove anything to anyone. A few days later, he visited his father's grave alone. The cemetery was silent except for the sound of wind moving through the trees. Daniel stood there staring at the name carved into the stone. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then finally, his voice cracked. "I understand now." Tears filled his eyes. "I thought success would make life meaningful," he whispered. "But I was losing myself the whole time." The wind blew softly around him as if the world itself had gone quiet. Daniel slowly sat beside the grave. "You tried to warn me," he said. "I just didn't listen." For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to cry completely. Not quietly, not secretly, honestly. And strangely, it felt like healing. As the sun began setting behind the cemetery trees, Daniel realized something important. Life was never about becoming the richest person in the room, or the most admired, or the most successful, because none of those things could save a person from emptiness. Real life was simpler than that. It was family dinners, late-night conversations, laughter, presence, love. The things people ignore while chasing everything else. Standing beside his father's grave, Daniel made himself a promise. He would stop living like tomorrow was guaranteed. Because one day, tomorrow disappears. And by then, most people realized they were running toward the wrong things all along. Years passed after Daniel changed his life. Not everything became perfect. He still had struggles. Still had bad days. Still carried regrets about the years he lost. But one thing was different now. He was finally living instead of simply surviving. Daniel eventually returned to work, but not to the same life that once consumed him. He chose a smaller company, worked fewer hours, and stopped treating success like the meaning of existence. For the first time, he created boundaries. No more answering emails at midnight. No more sacrificing family for promotions. No more pretending exhaustion was something to be proud of. At first, people judged him for it. Some old co-workers said he had lost his ambition. Others thought he was wasting his potential. But Daniel no longer cared about impressing people who were secretly unhappy themselves. Because now he understood something most people realize too late. A person can have everything the world admires, and still feel completely empty inside. One evening, nearly 3 years after his mother's hospitalization, Daniel uploaded a simple video online. No expensive editing. No dramatic music. Just him sitting in front of a camera telling his story honestly. He spoke about burnout, loneliness, ignored relationships, the danger of believing there will always be more time. At the end of the video, he repeated his father's words. If you're watching this, you still have time. Daniel expected almost nobody to watch it. But by the next morning, the video had exploded across the internet. Millions of people shared it. Not because it was entertaining, because it felt real. Comments flooded in from strangers around the world. One man wrote, "I haven't called my father in 8 months. I'm calling him today." Another said, "I spent years chasing money and forgot how to enjoy life." A woman commented, "This made me cry because I realized I'm becoming emotionally numb too." Daniel spent hours reading messages from people who saw themselves inside his story. Busy people. Lonely people. Exhausted people. People smiling online while secretly falling apart inside. And Daniel realized something heartbreaking. Modern life was slowly disconnecting everyone from what truly matters. People were becoming addicted to productivity but starving emotionally. Everyone was rushing. But nobody stopped to ask where they were actually going. One afternoon, Daniel received a message that affected him deeply. It came from a teenager named Lucas. The message said, "My older brother worked all the time. He kept saying he'd spend more time with us later. Last month, he died in a car accident coming home from work. Your story made me realize life can end before we're ready." Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Because that was the painful truth nobody wants to accept. Life is fragile. Terrifyingly fragile. People leave the house every day assuming they'll return home again. Most do. Some don't. And the scary part is, nobody knows which day will be their last normal day. Not the rich. Not the successful. Not the young. Not anyone. That realization changed the way Daniel saw the world forever. After his video became popular, Daniel started traveling to different cities to speak about mental health, burnout, and the importance of human connection. During one event, a young businessman stood up and asked him, "How do you know when you're wasting your life?" The room became completely silent. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. When your entire life becomes about surviving the future instead of living the present. The audience stayed quiet. Because almost everyone understood exactly what he meant. Too many people spend their lives trapped inside routines they hate. Wake up, work, stress, sleep, then repeat. Weeks become months. Months become years. And suddenly people wake up older, emotionally exhausted, and wondering where their lives disappeared. Daniel often thought about how close he came to becoming one of those people forever. If his mother never collapsed. If he never heard his father's voicemail. If life never forced him to stop. he probably would have continued destroying himself while calling it success. That's why he shared his story. Not to become famous. Not for attention. But because maybe someone watching still had a chance to change before it was too late. Maybe someone watching had a family member they needed to call. Maybe someone watching was mentally exhausted but afraid to slow down. Maybe someone watching kept postponing happiness for a future that may never arrive. One evening after finishing a speech, Daniel walked alone through a quiet park. Children laughed nearby while parents watched from benches. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. For a moment, Daniel simply stood there observing everything. Years ago, he would have ignored moments like this completely. Too busy. Too distracted. Too focused on the next goal. But now he understood something beautiful. Life is not hidden inside massive achievements. It exists inside ordinary moments people fail to notice. A conversation with your mother. Dinner with family. A walk at sunset. Laughing with someone you love. These small moments become the memories people carry forever. And standing there in the middle of that quiet park, Daniel finally understood the real meaning behind his father's words. If you're watching this, you still have time. Not unlimited time. Not forever. Just time right now. Time to change. Time to reconnect. Time to slow down. Time to truly live before life forces you to realize what matters most. Because one day, every person on earth will run out of tomorrows. And in the end, nobody wishes they worked more. Nobody wishes they spent less time with loved ones. Nobody wishes they ignored more sunsets, more laughter, or more memories. People only wish they had appreciated life while they still had it. So if you're hearing this today, maybe this is your warning too. Call the people you love. Take care of your mind. Stop delaying your happiness. Stop treating life like a race with no finish line. Because if you're watching this, you still have time. But don't wait until life gives you no choice.